Our reading this morning comes from the book of Ruth, chapter 1, is the first 18 verses. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. The names of his 2 sons was Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other was Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. When she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of the people by providing food for them, Naomi and her 2 daughter-in-laws prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where they had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's homes. May the Lord show kindness to you, as you have shown kindness to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still some hope for me, if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hands have gone against me." At this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you from me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. May God truly bless that word to your hearts. Wonderful story, and I now invite Andrew to come and expand on it for us, please.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I hope you can understand me. I started with a bad cold yesterday. I think the devil was trying to keep me away today, but it didn't work. And I'm still here with you. You probably find it a strange scripture reading that I've chosen this morning. I know it's a very old and well-known piece, but I hope that it will become clear in a bit why I've chosen that. Just before I continue, I just want to share a few verses with you from Mark chapter 12, verse 28. The teacher of the law was there. You heard the discussion. He saw that Jesus had given the Sadducees a good answer. So he came to him with a question: which commandment is the most important of all? Jesus replied, "The most important one is this: listen, Israel, the Lord your God is the only Lord. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second most important commandment is love your neighbor as you love yourself. As I've said, you probably find it strange that I've chosen the book of Ruth because I want to talk about love. And I hope it will become clearer as we carry on. Because when I was preparing this sermon, I kept thinking to myself, I continuously veer towards the love, no matter what I'm talking about. And this morning, I'm back on the love trail again. There are parents here sitting this morning that have got children. And I believe every one of us love our children. We all want the best for them. It's not always easy to bring children up. I know I had 3 of them, and they could sometimes wear me out. There were probably times that I felt like slowly strangling them without actually saying it when they came out with their new and modern ideas that the old man didn't understand. But irrespective of it all, I still love my children. And I still love my children today, even they are grown-ups and they've got their own children. I still worry about them. I still care about them. I'm concerned about their welfare. Make sure their personal lives are okay, whatever it is. Grown-ups or not, we love our children, we care about them. I know we can't always tell them what to do anymore because they're grown-ups. And I think to myself, we've got a really stupid idea, but it doesn't work because they're not going to listen to me. And this brings us this morning to Naomi. And we can divide this chapter into different parts. First, Naomi is left alone. Can't things get any worse for her? First, there was a famine. She and her husband and her 2 sons had to leave their home in Bethlehem, and they had to travel to Moab to try and find food and to make a living. Their 2 sons married 2 Moabite women, which I think wouldn't have made Naomi very happy, because her grandchildren would have been brought up by women who did not serve the God of Israel. But then her husband died and left her a widow in a land where she owned nothing, where only protection was her family. But then disaster struck again, and the 2 sons died, and neither of them had children. When the writer sums up the part of the story, the words are very stark. The woman was bereft of her 2 sons and her husband. And now we come to the second part of the story. Naomi wants to be left alone. The verse says nothing about the 2 daughters-in-law. Naomi didn't think of them as a permanent part of her family. So when she decided to go back to her own people in Bethlehem, she tried to convince these 2 younger women to stay behind. She wasn't angry with them. She didn't bear any grudges against them. But she was more concerned about their welfare, I think. Because Naomi asked God to bless them and be with them and treat them as they have treated her sons. But Naomi clearly didn't see them as family, believing instead that the bond, because of their intensified grief, was broken. To her, they weren't family at all. But these 2 women, even though Naomi tried to leave them behind, protested. They said, no, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi has made up her mind. I think if we read through the scripture, I think she was probably a very stubborn woman too. Maybe in the hearts of these two young women, they've accepted Naomi as family. But Naomi did not want it. She wanted them to stay behind. She wanted to be basically rid of them. Why was she so anxious to say goodbye to these two women? Maybe she was thinking mostly of them, realizing that without a dowry or a male relative that could arrange a marriage, a foreign-born woman would find it difficult in a different land. Naomi's argument was she couldn't provide them with any more sons to marry them. But I think Naomi was also thinking of herself here. It would be hard enough for her to make her own way back to her hometown as a childless widow. How could she care for others if she was going to struggle to just care for herself? How could she take responsibility of finding husbands for these two daughters-in-law? And then there's a depression over a great loss. And Naomi's conclusion that God has turned against her. Perhaps Naomi wasn't thinking very clearly. Whatever the reasons, it seemed that she's made up her mind that she was completely alone in the world. I know it's pretty common for us when we are emotionally in a situation where we've been badly hurt, that we sometimes want to be left alone. You don't always want to interact with people. Sometimes you don't want to talk about what happened in your life. You don't want to accept sympathy or any support from people. You just want to be on your own. Everything feels hard for you, and you resign yourself, you withdraw yourself, and you pull yourself into that situation where you want and are alone. You may, like Naomi, even try to tell those who care about you to stay away from you, and you start isolating yourself. I know we need to give people time to get to grieve. I know we've got to give people time to get through their situations and work through it, but so often people can isolate them on these little islands where they end up, where they be totally isolated and alone. And that's when we need to care for those people. When I only wanted these women to return, Orpah did, as Naomi asked, but probably not what Naomi really needed. But Ruth is a better example of how stubborn Christian ministry sometimes must be. And that is why I chose this chapter this morning. Because Ruth wouldn't leave her alone. Naomi got away with Orpah. Orpah kissed her goodbye and returned to her people. But Ruth decided she's not going anywhere. The beautiful poetry of Ruth's speech, sometimes here at weddings, entreat me not to leave thee, should not distract us from what Ruth was actually saying. Don't ask me again. Don't tell me to go back. Ruth doesn't ask Naomi's permission to tag along on the trip to Bethlehem. She doesn't propose a plan for a mother-in-law to consider. Instead, she simply announces her travel plans. Wherever you go, I'm going. Wherever you go, I'm going. Wherever you're going to live, I'm going to live. I'm staying with you, whatever that turns out to be. And then the length of the contract, which interested me too, is until they bury us in the same cemetery plot. Ruth also claims that she's taking Naomi's God as her God. And since Naomi believes that God has cursed her, Ruth says, may the Lord do thus to me, meaning that, well, maybe God's hand is against you, or you think God's hand is against you, then may that God do to me worse than what he's done to you. Whatever happens, you're not rid of me. I'm staying with you. And here, basically, Naomi was outstubborn. She could not get rid of Ruth. And then we come to that part, Ruth and God's essence. The trip back to Bethlehem couldn't have been easy or much fun, with Naomi grieving, silent, Ruth trying to balance her own grief of losing her own husband, while she was trying to care for Naomi, and her anxieties probably of what she got herself into. Because she insisted on going with Naomi, but she didn't know what was waiting on the other end for her. She was going into the unknown, simply concerned about being with Naomi. But this story is in the end, and that's why it was so interesting to me, about God's essence. The Hebrew word often translated as steadfast love or covenant mercy. As it is that part of God's nature that keeps God faithful to the covenants with humans, even when we are unfaithful. And Ruth is a very clear example of what essence looks like. In the face of death, the destruction of home, the loss of hope, Ruth steadfastly insisted that she and Naomi were going to live together, make a home together, and be a family, an embodiment of God's steadfast love. God loves us, irrespective of whether we deserve or even want to be loved. In this story, it's like Ruth, who told her mother-in-law that she might as well give up on sending her away. When I read this chapter, and I think we all practically know it by heart, it's such a well-known one, and I read it, and I sat thinking about it, and I thought, I've missed something here. And I read it again. And something that I've noticed was that nowhere in this chapter do we find the word love. No matter what Ruth did, how she supported her mother-in-law, whatever she said to her, she never used the word love. But her actions, everything she did, proved to me that she loved her mother-in-law, and that's why I chose this chapter. Because Ruth was prepared to give everything up, even though she was mourning the loss of her husband. She was prepared to leave her family behind, the people that she grew up with. She even prepared to accept Naomi's God. She left everything behind that she had. and one that in the unknown was Naomi. And if she did not love a mother-in-law, why did she do it? Why did she declare everything that she was willing to do if she didn't deep down have that love for her mother? Although she never mentioned it, she never said it, we don't find it anywhere in the chapter. And I've got 25 Bibles on my bookcase, and I went through a few yesterday, and I couldn't find the word love anywhere. But to me, it's an embodiment of a steadfast love that she had for her. We all love our families, we love our children, we love our fellow Christians, we love our friends, but how close are you and I to God's essence, to that steadfast love, that love that keeps God with us every day, even when you and I want to be alone. We thank God for friends and family that are stubbornly staying with us and loving us and supporting us. But He loved us with a steadfast love even before you and I were born. That love of God has never changed. That love is still the same today. That's why He paid the price on the cross for me and you. That's why He shed His blood. That's why His body was broken. Because of that word, love. God is with us constantly, even though we don't always believe, so sometimes we feel as if God has forsaken us. God never turns away from any of us. Because the love has been perfected among us in this, that we may have boldness on the day of judgment. Because as He is, so are we in this world. Love, a four-letter word we so often probably use every day of our lives. But do we sometimes think what we truly mean when we use that word love? We love our cars, we love our homes, we love our sports, we love many things in our lives. But do we really think the meaning of that word, love? In a Vine's expository dictionary for New and Old Testament words, love comes from the Greek word that I looked up. The Greek word agapeo, or agape, which is to describe the attitude of God towards His Son and to the human race in general. Love can be known only from the actions that it prompts. God's love is seen in the gift of His Son. But obviously, this is not the love of complacency or affection that is not drawn by any excellency in its object. It was an exercise of divine will, deliberate choice, made without the sign of course, save that which lies in the nature of God Himself. Christian love is a fruit of His Spirit in the Christian. Christian love as God for its primary object and expresses itself first of all in implicit obedience to His commandments. Christian love, whether exercised towards your fellow Christian brothers or sisters, or towards men in general, should seek the welfare of all. I know in many occasions it can be difficult to show that love to people. So often people shy away from you when you're there for them. But in those few verses that I've read to you this morning, it's clear that love is equated with God without exception. The verses I read confirms that the nature of God is love. God commands us to love one another, and so fulfill the word of the Lord. Loving God, loving others, and loving oneself requires that Christians are aggressively attentive to God's command to love, even to the extent of loving our neighbor as ourselves, which I know can be difficult. It's clear that God's love is equated with God without exception. Our verses that we can read through the scriptures about love proves God's love for us. We must ask ourselves sometimes why there's such a strong division between Christian and Muslim, between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, between different countries. Our attitude towards our neighbour that lives opposite us on the street. The probably comes from the scriptural indictment of saying we love God while we hating others. In many cases, the convictions are so strong that rather than love one another or love that person that differs from us, that's got different ideas from us, that we show intolerance and we do not talk to that person. Oh, he's a miserable old bloke over there. I try and say hello to him and he's just mumbling to me. I'm not talking to him again. Instead of trying to find out why is he so miserable, maybe he needs some help, maybe he needs some support. I know I've got a neighbor like that. And sometimes he'll say hello to me, and other days he'll ignore me. I'm not even existing. But it's in situations like that when the most loving thing might be sometimes to take forceful action. Keep saying hello to him. Keep saying good morning every time you see him. Eventually that person will realize that there is something different in your life. You may ask the question, how do we love in the face of so many differences? It's frightening, as Keith was praying this morning about the wars that's going on in the world. People killing each other, bombing each other. But I believe that love succeeds best when caring people express the sense of justice. I believe love succeeds as long-term approach to almost any human affliction or trouble if we persevere. It's necessary for us to use that power of love that God has given us. I know it's true that if you follow Jesus, you will find happiness and courage. But you can also get your problems and your difficulties along the way. Life isn't always easy. Problems arise, problems that we've got to deal with. But then sometimes the only way out is to show that love. God's love has been perfected among us in this, that we may have boldness on the day of judgment. Because as he is, so are we in this world. Love is the most difficult thing you can possibly find. That commandment, love one another, I think is the most important, but also probably the hardest commandment to follow. People are difficult. You try and support people, but that's for us as believers, as Christians. That's what God commands from us. love one another, irrespective of who they are, of what they are, how difficult they are. God has loved us first. God's love for me and you has never changed. It cannot change because He is God. And God wants us to share that love for one another. It's for us as Christians to carry that love out, to support those that are in need, those that are struggling. Sometimes people don't want your love, but show them. You don't need to use the word love because some people find difficult saying it. But let your actions show people that you truly love them, that you care for them, that you support them, that you're there for them. And through your actions, let God's love shine through. Let them see that God's love lives within you and through you. I just want to close with something you might say to me is irrelevant, but I promised my children, especially after my wife died, that I would always keep my phone with me. Because when they phone, especially my daughter, and I don't answer that phone, she goes in a panic mode that I've taken back again. And while I'm busy around the house, I always log onto gospel music. And there's a special song, and I call it a love song, that it seems 4 or 5 times a day that song will come through, and different artists will sing it, and young kids will sing it in competitions that they are entering. And over the past week, I've heard it in Italian and French and in Spanish, although I could understand it, but it wasn't. And it's a love song to God, basically acknowledging God's love, but also giving His love to God because of what God means to Him. And I just want to share this one bit with you. I won't punish you by singing it to you, but I'll read it to you. And it says, I love you, Lord, for your mercy never failed. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life, you have been faithful. All my life, you have been good, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. And the song carries on, and it basically worships God's goodness, but it also, the songwriter also declares his love for God. Why? Because he acknowledges God's faithfulness. He acknowledges God's greatness. He acknowledges that God keeps him safe, keeps him in his hands. And that's what love is about. It's for us to carry that love out, to carry that love forth for those that do not know God, those that are struggling, that are suffering. Let us share that love of God with them. Let them know that God's love lives in and through us. But above all, let us always remember to bring God our own love offering, to tell him that we love him because of what he's done for me and for you. Love one another and so fulfill the word of God.